Hello and welcome. I'm Rosemary Pena, President of the Black German Heritage and Research Association, and Adjunct Professor of German Studies at UBC Vancouver. Our conversation today is the second in our new event series themed Black Germany and Beyond. My colleague, Dr. Emily Fraser-Rath, and I are pleased to welcome Elisabeth Clarke-Hasters as our special guest and today's discussant, Dr. Sonya Donaldson. But before we begin, I'll ask Emily if she'll kindly share a little bit about our work together before introducing and turning the conversation over to Elisabeth and Sonya. Emily?
Thank you, Rosemary. My name is Emily Fraser-Rath, and I'm a visiting assistant professor of German Studies at Davidson College, a small liberal arts institution just north of Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm also the executive director of the BGHRA. We are so excited to be able to invite our special guest, Elisabeth Clarke-Hasters, and our discussant, Dr. Sonya Donaldson, to Davidson College and to the BGHRA today. Today is March 3rd, 2022, and we, Dr. Pena, me, and our students here at Davidson College are in our 6th official week together. This semester, Dr. Pena and I are so pleased to have another opportunity to work with our Davidson students as we co-teach our second course together. German 351, or Race, Gender, Migration, asks us to employ a critical lens informed by Black German studies to questions of migration, belonging, and identity, as these big human topics intersect with Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, with the German-speaking world, and with the lives and experiences of the global Black German community. The class, like its predecessor, consists of 3 parts. It's first an exploration of the aforementioned themes as they are or could be handled in the field of Black German studies. Second, it's a community-based learning course as we support the BGHRA through our work and will feature our final projects in the BGHRA archive. And third, it is most importantly an opportunity for our students, many of whom are in the audience today, and through these recordings, our broader BGHRA and Davidson communities, to speak with people whose lives and work intersect with, influence, shape, and inform Black German studies. The first few conversations in our new series at the BGHRA, called, as Rosemary mentioned, Black Germany and Beyond, would not be possible without the generous support of the Dean Rusk International Studies Program Speaker Fund here at Davidson, and the interim director of the Dean Rusk program, Dr. Verna Case, as well as its program administrator, Meg Zweifel. I also cannot ever thank Meg Sawicki enough. She is our German Studies Department administrator for her support, encouragement, and organization that truly has kept us going and remains a vital part of what we are doing. So to Meg, Mel, and Verna, thank you. Before we get started and before Dr. Pena and I turn things over to Dr. Donaldson and to Elisabeth Clarke-Hasters, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our distinguished guests. First, our discussant, Dr. Sonya Donaldson, is Associate Professor of English at New Jersey City University. She is currently completing her book manuscript, Irreconcilable Differences, Memory, History, and the Echoes of Diaspora. She has also launched a digital humanities project called Singing the Nation into Being, Anthems and the Politics of Black Performance, which focuses on Lift Every Voice and Sing, also known as the Black National Anthem. She received her PhD from the University of Virginia, where her research focused on Afro-German autobiographical narratives. Dr. Donaldson's academic research centers on the intersections of race, gender, class, sexual identities, and technologies. And I'd also like to welcome Elisabeth Clarke-Hasters here today. We're so honored to have you and so excited to be in conversation with you. Elisabeth Clarke-Hasters studied classical ballet and modern dance in Philadelphia, in North Carolina, which I'd love to hear more about where, and at the School of American Ballet in New York. She began her acting studies at age 13 and was a member of the Children's Repertory Theater in Philadelphia and the Poor People's Theater in New York. She was also a member of the Dance Theater of Harlem. She came to Europe in 1971 to study at the Mudra School of Maurice Béjart. I practiced earlier and my French is so bad, and danced with the Ballet du XXe siècle. Before turning to choreography and teaching, she worked extensively with Karl-Heinz Stockhausen and Pina Bausch, and performed as an actress in the municipal theaters of Cologne, Dusseldorf, and Koblenz. Clarke-Hasters has been a choreographer for the Salzburg Festival, the Burg Theater Wien, the Maggio Musicale in Florence, the Oper Leipzig, among others. She was assistant school director at the Arturo Schauspielschule in Cologne and school director at the Etage in Berlin, where she also led the dance department until 2018. She has developed several programs for dance in schools, specifically combining dance composition and STEM curriculum. In 2010, she completed her training as a personal development coach and is presently developing several new programs, including a coaching program specifically for people of color. So to Dr. Donaldson, to Sonya, and to Elisabeth, welcome, and I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you. Happy to welcome Elisabeth Clarke-Hasters here. This is such a thrilling moment. We were actually talking a little bit earlier before the program officially began about your career, which is such a wealth of experience and sort of global knowledge that comes through in art and performance. I wanted to kind of start a little bit to go back to the sort of earlier years, though, and ask you what drew you initially to dance and to theater, and specifically to ballet.
Well, what drew me to dance was simply that whenever I heard music, I moved.
Mm-hmm.
And I jumped around the living room and the dining room, and this was all when I was really just after learning to walk. I started to dance whenever I heard music. So when I got to be about 4 years old, my mother asked me, "Would you like to take some dance lessons?" And I said yes, and then I just never stopped. What drew me to ballet, that was really interesting, because when I took my first ballet class, it was in a little studio, a walk up, and I had to, put on special clothes, and then I walked into the studio, and there was a person teaching the class, and she was not like anyone I had ever met in my life. It was a small, elderly Russian lady with a high voice, and she was strict in a way that I had never met before. And I was fascinated by it. She opened a new world for me. It was like opening a door into a world that I had not known. And that really fascinated me. And the strictness fascinated me as well. That there was a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things, and you had to try to approach this right way to do things. So I liked that, and as I continued with ballet, I found I loved the logic of ballet. Just made so much sense.
Wow. And so these very early years of ballet, were they in North Carolina or Philadelphia?
In Philadelphia.
In Philadelphia. And so the family then migrated pretty early. Or did you go to, were you in North Carolina? After.
The family lived in Philadelphia.
Oh, I see.
Stayed in Philadelphia.
Okay.
I was the one who was moving around.
Ah, okay.
And in North Carolina, that was the now University of North Carolina School of the Arts, then just North Carolina School of the Arts. And it was also a boarding school, you know, so I was a boarding student, and that was from ninth grade.
Oh, I see.
Gotcha.
So you sort of went in between those two places. What
Yeah.
was Philly like growing up as a young girl and taking ballet classes and being involved in the arts? What was the sort of community like? What was the environment like?
It was really interesting because where we lived was like in West Philly. Lower middle class to middle class, almost exclusively Black families. Where I went to school was something completely different. I went to Friends Select School. It was a Quaker school, and I was a scholarship student, and that was almost completely white space. And then there was ballet, which was also an almost completely white space, but other people. So I kept moving between worlds. So I like, what was Philly like? Philly was, I mean, these worlds were divided. They didn't touch each other, which kind of got complicated because I belonged everywhere and nowhere.
So did ballet provide you with a sense of belonging in some ways? What did that sort of commitment to the art do for you?
And that was my safe space. It was my safe space where I felt like I could be who I truly was when I was dancing. And as I said, I liked the logic of ballet. I liked the strictness of ballet. In this more or less constrained way, I found a way to unfold and spread my wings within a strict framework. And that was like really my safe space.
Oh, interesting. What is the logic of ballet? What is that for us? And
It's
what is
geometry.
it for you? It's geometry. Yeah.
It's geometry.
Yeah. And so when did you decide, at what age did you decide that this is the thing that I will be doing? And how did you sort of orient yourself to that and move in the direction of the art more fully?
For me, that decision was very early. My mother, a wonderful, absolutely wonderful person, took me to see a performance of the Pennsylvania Ballet. They were doing Carmina Burana, and I watched it and I said, that's what I'm going to do. I guess I was about 8. And that was decided then.
Wow, that's very early. That it must have been a really great feeling to know at that early age that this was the thing for you.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. At age 8, a lot of people know what they're going to do. They just change their minds later on. But I mean, when you ask an 8-year-old, they always have things that they want to do or want to be. And yeah, with influence of family, of peers, of media, they
Mhm.
changed their minds. I just didn't.
Mhm. That has me thinking now. Because although I'm currently a professor, I remember very early on thinking I'm going to be a journalist, and I was a journalist, and then I moved into this field. And so now here we are again in the sort of interstitial space. So thank you for that clarity of the 8-year-old. um, can we talk then a little bit? I love this idea of you sort of painting for us a picture of community and what Philadelphia was like, and life for you was like. And I'm also interested in what that scene you describe about that first moment of the ballet class where you talked about putting on the costume, and there's a sense of like theatricality about it. You walked up the stairs and you encounter this person. And I'm wondering if what are the elements of dance, of theater that that sort of align with life in certain ways in terms of performance.
Mhm. Very interesting question. I've always had a weakness for theatricality. I think I was a very dramatic child. At least that's what my elder brother tells me. I was a very dramatic child. But I was always fascinated by theatricality, always fascinated by things that were different from everyday life. Every day was often bleak. Especially like in the early 60s in an urban setting like Philly,
Right.
Things were often bleak.
Right.
And I loved being able to escape that. But it didn't feel like an escape. It felt like I was looking past the bleakness, thinking this can't be all. I refuse to believe that this is all there is.
Wow. Yeah.
And so going into the arts, going into theater, anything that was out of the ordinary, and which pointed towards a larger life, I was there for it. And even if it was like taking a walk in the woods at my grandmother's house.
Right. So you were already imagining and sort of projected a future, right? That was different or not as bleak as the sort of current present that you were.
Yeah, I mean, this coincided, my decision to be a dancer coincided with the time when I realized I do not want to stay in Philadelphia. And we had at home, we had a globe, and I used to spin the globe and then put my finger on it and say, I want to go there and I want to go there. And I wanted to see the world. And I knew I didn't want to stay in Philadelphia the way it was then.
Yeah, yeah. So what was the first place outside of the US that you landed? That was that a point on the globe that you had pointed on before? And how did you get there? What was the shift from the US to that other place?
Okay, part of the shift was also like learning about history and learning about the world and so on, and realizing that Europe had colonized the rest of the world. And then I looked at Europe on the globe, and it was just this teeny tiny bit of land, and the rest of the globe. And I was wondering, what's the story with these Europeans? Really, why did they do that? You
Good
know, why did they
question.
feel like they had to do that, to go everywhere and tell everybody, this now belongs to me?
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I actually, as a child, already wanted to go to Europe because I wanted to find out what was wrong with them, more or less.
Wow. Did you find out?
I'm working on it. Still working on it. I mean, yeah, did I find out?
Mhm.
I can just say, and this is like something that informs my intersection of personal development and art and so on, is finding out what white supremacy was.
Mhm. Mhm.
And being completely flabbergasted
Mhm.
by this idea. I thought it was really silly, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
not
Right.
when I was a kid. I thought it was really silly,
Mhm.
but apparently there were a lot of people that took that very seriously. And the more I experience in the world and of the world,
Mhm.
the more I see that this is a real problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like a real problem in the sense of it's not imaginary. This is a real problem.
Mhm.
And it's something I still haven't figured out why people think that this is a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think our current moment also in terms of, you know, what's happening in the European landscape, right, also sort of presses that question even more, I think.
Yeah.
Sort of like, what's the problem? What is wrong? But I so you got to Europe in 1971, right? You
Yeah.
left the US and you landed in 1971. What was the sort of Europe that you landed in 1971? What was that like? And what are some of the sort of transformations that you've seen and experienced over time? And what are the ways that you know you've also sort of been transformed? I know that's a huge thing, but maybe we can start with the sort of 1971 arrival.
Where I landed. I
Yeah.
landed in Brussels.
Oh.
Yeah. This is really interesting because like nobody knows about Brussels.
Yeah.
Or nobody knows about Belgium. It's sort of
Yeah.
one may have heard the name, but like nobody knows really what it is.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, one woman asked me, she said, "Oh, you're going to Belgium. What part of France is that in?" And I said, "It's a separate country." And she was very surprised by that.
Mm.
So like, yeah,
Wow.
Belgium.
Right.
And at that time, Brussels was also undergoing strong transitions,
Mm-hmm.
Economic transitions. Brussels was a city that was either there were like really rich people who had their fortunes from colonial involvement, but there was a strong working class in Brussels that didn't really have much of anything. And then there was the fact that Belgium had their colony in the Congo, and so there was a lot of racism, which sort of didn't apply to me because I was an American. When people heard I was American, then I wasn't Black.
Interesting.
Yeah, that was kind of weird, but
that is really interesting. So
yeah,
did you I'm sorry, go ahead.
Americans were really, really well seen and well thought of there. So
Wow.
I was in a very privileged position, but I still could, feel and sense the strong racism there. And where I landed was at this school, the School of Beja. It was an experimental school. He thought artists should be able to express themselves in many, many different ways. So we had ballet classes, classes of modern dance, acting, singing, rhythmics, and we were expected to be able to switch from one to the other, which I was really fascinated by. And the interesting thing about Beja is he was a ballet rebel. He really revolutionized ballet. He did things like he would have performances at 5:30 so that people, when they got off work, before they went home, they could go to the ballet. And he did ballets in stadiums and places where lots and lots of people could come. And for the 70s, this was just completely revolutionary.
Oh, wow. Wow. So there's a kind of democratizing of this elite art, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
That's what he wanted.
Wow. That's pretty amazing. And so what did that do for you to be in Brussels, to be in this sort of European space, the space of the with all that colonial history, right? The history of and especially for the Congo, right? The kind of brutality that it's that we know, right? And navigating that space as an African American woman, as a dancer, but also the ways in which Black in certain European spaces get read as African, right? Or sort of non-human. So what sort of navigation, what sort of shifts were you making through that space?
Well, one must not forget that at that time I was 17. So there I was in Brussels on my own in Europe, and I thought I was all grown up.
Okay, so my picture changes a little bit now.
That's the kind of thing that you think when you're 17. But I mean, of course, I was fascinated. I was totally fascinated that I could go to Paris for the weekend. And that sounds from a US standpoint, it sounds like something really, really elegant and really luxurious. And actually, it's getting on the train going from Philly to New York.
Yeah.
Brussels to Paris is like nothing. And Europe was not economically strong at that point, at least, so I had an allowance, $1 allowance, that took me far.
Oh, $1.
That took, yeah, it took me
Wow.
far. At that time, the dollar was like, compared to European currencies, was very, very strong. So I was a 17-year-old girl just exploring Europe, being associated with the most avant-garde ballet that there was at the time. Yeah, but all that was wonderful.
Right.
Also, discovering food was like really wonderful. But I was aware of and trying to avoid this awareness of being seen as a kind of a mascot.
Yeah.
I could say I was a puppy. Everybody wanted to know me. I got invited to all the parties of the well-to-do Belgians, and also the artistic Belgians, because there were a lot of them. And there were, people who contributed much to the arts. But I was aware of being a puppy.
So you'd say there was a bit of fetishism happening.
A bit.
I'm being generous here.
Yes.
Right. So avoiding those sort of contexts, or having to navigate that history, and also the sort of fetishization of you as a young African-American woman and as a dancer, right? As a
Yes.
performer. Yeah. That's a lot for 17.
Yeah, I wasn't really very good at it.
Yeah.
To say that it went to my head would be an understatement.
Oh. Wow. That's, well, 17, as the kids say, you were living your best life, right? and
Yeah, I think with 17, you're allowed to do that.
Yeah.
You're allowed to have those illusions, because it doesn't last long.
Right.
It doesn't last long. I mean, this creeping suspicion that I was not being seen.
Yeah. Yeah.
That I had tried to avoid. It doesn't, you can't avoid it forever.
Right.
And then it's the question, for me was the question, what do I do about this? It would have been easy to play along. My upbringing would not allow me to play along. I also did not want to, I didn't want to be offensive.
Yeah.
So it was a question of finding boundaries and borders. And also, where do I find my people? Where do I find my people? I mean, I was still navigating almost exclusively white spaces. There were people that were sympathetic, but there were not so many people that actually knew what it meant to be an African-American woman in these spaces.
Right.
And interestingly enough, I mean, the 70s, Europe was still actually still working through its own traumata.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
So
Yeah, early 1970s, not far from 1968, lots of turmoil happening. Yeah, so a lot of working through, a lot of sort of figuring out at the levels of nations, right? But
yes,
also individuals as well. So really interesting period. And so you left Brussels at some point. You left Belgium at some point.
yes.
I'm attempting to kind of construct a map of your movement across Europe. What does that look like?
Yeah. My third year in Brussels, that was also the third year of the school, I had a back injury and I couldn't dance for quite a while. And then Mr. Beja asked me, what are you doing next month? And he told me that Mr. Stockhausen had written a piece for a dancer or with movement, and so and he would like to send me there and to do this piece. So I thought, okay. So I came to Germany. Stockhausen lived just outside of Cologne. Very nice thing happened, you know, they were telling me how to get to where I needed to go. And they said, when you get off the train in Cologne, you go outside and you look for the cathedral. It's not very far from the train station. If you can't find it, ask anybody, they'll tell you where it is. So I thought it was like close to the train station. Have you ever been to Cologne?
I have, yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So I walked out of the train station and I went, oh, okay. There's the cathedral.
Yeah.
But then I went out to the countryside where Mr. Stockhausen was living, and yeah, he gave me a talk about this piece that he wanted to do and showed me some of the things. Make a long story short, I ended up doing this piece and working with him for years. Years, and I had not been aware of the position that he held and still holds in contemporary music.
Oh, wow.
And when I found out who it was that I was working with, I was very surprised because I just come from like the real avant-garde of ballet, who was also a philosopher. His father, Beja's father, was a philosopher. And so then I went from one extraordinary person to the next.
Wow. 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 And you obviously healed and were fine and were able to perform.
Yeah, but I was still a mascot. I was still a puppy. This time, Mr. Stockhausen thought I was his puppy doing his work.
Oh, wow.
You know, but he thought that about everybody who worked with him. They belonged to him because they were doing his works. I was searching for artistic dialogue, people that I could be on like meet at eye level. This was not happening.
Wow.
So those were productive years, fascinating time, you know, such experimentation in the arts and fascinating crossovers. But I felt I was not being taken seriously. It was a very lonely time as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you were looking for, as you said, the sort of meeting at eye level, a more sort of collaborative kind of way of expressing your art and expressing yourself through your art. So at that moment, how would you say that how would you describe sort of what your art meant to you, and what were the things that you wanted to sort of be in dialogue about and express?
Art meant, for me, art meant humanity. This was my humanity that was, it transcended every allegiance that I had. It transcended my allegiance to a gender, to a nationality, to an ethnicity. And still, all of those things were part of it. But as when I was a little girl and said, this is opening a door into a world that is not bleak. One could also say opening a door to a spiritual dimension. That's where my art was. It was always striving in this spiritual dimension without losing touch with the real world that I was living in, with its real people and its real problems. And I could always find people that would understand or meet me at certain parts of that. But it was almost impossible to find someone who would meet me at the conjunction of all of those things.
And so what does that mean to you then, to be in that place and be in a place of understanding, of not necessarily being met in dialogue, right? At that conjunction, what did that require you to do to access or express that humanity?
It required me to be, on the one hand, a sort of secret agent. You know, I was working in the real world and had to sort of disguise myself, but actually I was coming from somewhere else. And sort of, I had to dial things down so that I could work with other people, because there were places they couldn't follow. Yeah, and I had the feeling that, well, okay, then nobody's ever going to understand me. Thinking that's a bit sad, but thinking also, I guess that's just the way it is. And it required me to be a chameleon.
Wow. It's incredible. I'm thinking about how we get to, so we talked a little bit about the European landscape and sort of charted a bit of a course in terms of your own development in and through this space. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what are some of the shifts that you've seen, particularly since the 1970s, in terms of the experiences of white supremacy, for example, or your observations about white supremacy, and what are some of the shifts or understanding that shifts you've seen and understandings that you've come to in the European space?
Well, I think the biggest shift that I've witnessed is that it's now becoming something that you are allowed to say in polite society, that you actually do think that being white is better than being non-white. That was not the case when I arrived in Europe. That was not something one said in polite society. People don't generally say being white is better. But there's still very much this thing about good blood. and there's still very much a thing about yeah, it's very interesting. Like there's a lot of interracial dating, marriage, etc. A lot of children. When I got to Cologne, there were like no Black people. None. That's not true, of course, but
Right.
it was a small sensation to meet a Black person walking along the street. Now they're like all of these Black Germans.
Yeah.
And it's a real problem for the non-Black Germans to accept that being German does not necessarily mean being white. And so there's a lot of tension around that. And there's, then it's also sort of difficult for the Black Germans because at the moment, it still feels for a lot of them that they have to choose. So in their identity, they have to make the choice. But I think this generation is so wonderful. They're so amazing. They're really confronting this question of identity. And they're talking about it, and they're writing about it, and they're making pieces about it, and they're very much in contact with each other. They don't see eye to eye on everything, but they're really doing it, and I'm fascinated. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to have 3 children. So I stay very much in touch with this younger Black German community.
Right. And you see the shifts and changes in the politics that get articulated in opposition to this sort of white supremacist sort of notion of belonging.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the problem is the politicians are still, they're still infected with this white supremacy. They believe that they don't have it. They believe that they're not thinking like that. But now it's getting pointed out to them, there are systemic problems here. This is not just sort of by accident that certain things look the way they do.
Right.
So this is also very much the work of this younger generation. But they're calling attention to it, and this is extremely painful for Germans who really wanted to do this well, after this, after National Socialism, they really wanted to do this well. And they really wanted to believe that everybody's equal. But they also really wanted to believe Yeah, well, actually, we sort of are the master race. So
That's beyond conflicted. That's a sort of psychologically deep issue, right?
yeah, well, there are issues.
Absolutely. So I wonder if we could switch a little bit in the time we have remaining before Q&A. And I wanted to talk a bit about your experiences moving from, or I shouldn't say moving from, but being a teacher, being an educator, and sort of what moves you into this place and this role, and what are some of the things that you hope to accomplish as you shift. I noticed there have been a few shifts in your career. Yeah. Good.
Yeah, we even left some of them out.
Ah.
Yeah, we left out acting altogether.
Little right. Well, we'll have to have an additional conversation.
But being a teacher,
Mhm.
my main motivation for being a teacher, or for becoming a teacher or starting to teach, was gratitude to my teachers. I had such amazing teachers, and they didn't just teach me how to move and how to do classical dance, or how to make a character come to life, or so on, but they taught me that art comes from a place of love, that art is about the love and respect for the human condition. This is why I say I had excellent teachers, because not all dance teachers will do that. So I felt like, hey, I was this little girl from Philadelphia, and I've been all over the world because of the teachers that I had, that let me become the artist that I became. And I traveled the world, and now I would like to give that to other people, so the next generation, that they know that it's not just about how high you can lift your leg or how much turnout you have, but it's about putting your heart and your spirit and your soul on the line for your audience, giving them something, giving them maybe just a scent of what it means to be human. That's why I became a teacher. And I love teaching. I really do. I love teaching. I love watching this moment happen when someone just suddenly understands, and how they light up. I live for that. I just love it.
Yeah. And is that part of the impetus for this program, this coaching program that you're developing? I know elsewhere you've talked about sort of pairing young performers with mentors. Is that part of the work that you are doing now, or planning?
Yeah, it's part of the work that I'm reaching for.
Okay.
Yeah, pairing young people with mentors. We talked about my past when I was 17, and all the illusions that you have when you're a 17-year-old artist. But at the same time, you have all these illusions, but you're also like a sponge. And so it matters which influences you have. And pairing young artists with mentors that really know that and feel that and have something that they want to transmit. That I think first of all that there are lots and lots of artists, older artists, who really want to do that. You know, they really want to give it to the next generation. And I think there are a lot of younger artists or artists in becoming who would love to have somebody there that's not just going to talk about their technique and who's not going to just talk about you have to try to satisfy the market and so on, but who's going to talk about who they are as an artist, you know, and who's prepared to be the fertilizer.
So
if you hear about any artists that really would like to do that, they should get in touch with me. We'll make this program work.
So in the, we had a little bit of a conversation before the program began. And one of the things that we sort of touched on was this idea of an archive or the archive of sort of Black knowledges, right? And thinking about how do we ensure that your work, your presence in the space, the impact that you've had, and you and other African-American Black artists as well, how do we, or how can we ensure that this history is alive for future generations, right? So in the absence of, you know, film, for example, or other, what are some of the ways that we can keep this history and share this history, your incredible work and legacy?
Yeah, well, there needs to be like an archive, like a traditional archive with photographs and articles and so on, and interviews. There needs to be that. But the best archive of all is people. So I think to make an archive, you've got to get these artists who have a world of experience and put them in front of a class of young, thirsty people, because that they will keep that. They'll keep that, and they'll keep not just the facts, but the spirit. So that's the archive. It's alive.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So one final question for me before, I know I keep saying one final question, but I did want to have you talk a little bit about the different sort of modes of performance, dance and acting, and the ways that you approached each and what each sort of did for you as a performer. I know these questions.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with dance because I did that first. The source of dance is joy. So what dance did for me is it allowed me always to get into that state of joy. Even standing at the ballet bar, which is everything but fun. It's no fun to do ballet class. unless you connect with that joy of dancing. You know, so that's what dance was about for me. Acting, playing someone else. You never play somebody else. You always play an aspect of yourself that you decided not to use.
Oh, wow.
And sometimes it's hard to admit that. But acting was like, for me, always finding out, there's that corner of me and I haven't used it, but actually it's there. You can play the most awful, horrendous roles, and somewhere there's a corner of you where that, even in maybe just in the form of a little seed, but that's there. It's there. And so it was, acting has taught me empathy, I would say, and taught me not to feel that I'm different from or better than anyone else, because they're all in here.
Wow, that's something to think about. That's a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's also why I love teaching acting.
Yeah. That opportunity to help people tap aspects of themselves, right? And get to know those parts of themselves.
Yeah, and then they don't have to use them. Like, I played Medea. I do not have to kill my children.
We hope not.
You know?
Yeah.
I don't have to do that. But I do know where she comes from.
Right. Yes.
So yeah, that's kind of a big thing.
Yes, it is. That's great. Well, thank you for this. I'm going to turn to the audience. I know we have a couple of questions, and please, again, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A, and we'll get to as many as we can. So I think Diane Brown asked, did you perform in Bayart's Bolero, and which dance pieces did you perform while in Germany?
No, I never performed in Bolero. Pity. But yeah, no, I never did that. The strongest role I had in the Jean's ballet was in the Ninth Symphony. So there's a big soloist part, which I actually got to do. But yeah. And when I got to Germany, I was working with Pina. So I did the Rite of Spring, and I did the whole Stravinsky evening, which was like wonderful pieces. And then we did the Seven Deadly Sins, and we did Bluebeard, and then arias and Kontakthof. Those I did. And then I did a lot of like solo work. But those were the things I did with the companies.
And the second question is, how many years did you work with Pina Bausch?
4 years.
4 years.
I would tell you which years they are, but that would date me.
Oh, well, and then we
Okay.
won't mention the years.
Okay,
But
I'll tell you. I'll tell you.
okay,
I'll let
great.
you know.
For the archives, for the
Yes,
archives.
for the archives, from 1976 to 1980.
Wow. Oh. Mhm. And how was it for you to work with Pina Bausch?
That was really interesting. You know, I mean, the way she worked, she took a lot of her material from the people in her company. So she put a lot of trust in us, and we had to just sort of follow her lead, although we had no idea where things were going, you know, because her structure was a very personal one. It wasn't a structure that you could actually look at and observe and so on. The pieces came together in a very personal way. She had loads of material, and then she would just say, oh, try putting this together with that, and try putting this scene then in front of that, and you do the other scene back there in the corner. And she would look at it and say, okay, now switch that around. And she would look at things until she liked them and said, and would say, okay, we're going to do it that way. So we had, that was the closest I came to an artistic eye level collaboration.
Wow.
But there were also things that there were moments where she was not open and aware of things that were really different from her. I mean, it was okay in the company because that was her vision, and that was fine. But you could be different, but you couldn't be too different.
I see. Wow. So if there are no other questions, I thought we might then turn back to the acting that we sort of mentioned a little bit.
I have a question.
Hello, Rosemary.
Hello.
Yes, please ask.
Question here. Because you're so far away now, and I mean that literally and figuratively, from that little girl in Philly, and where I'm sitting right now, Philly is about 15 minutes away when traffic is good. So if you were to look back at that little girl in Philly, what would you tell her about what would you tell her? What would you say to her? And what would you say to another little girl in Philly today who might be looking at this video?
I would tell her, you're right. Follow your instincts. No matter where they lead you, let yourself be surprised, but you're right. Don't let people make you think you're wrong. That's what I would tell the little girl that I was in Philly. And that's exactly what I would tell a little girl in Philly today. Yeah, that's what I would tell her. And I would also tell her, you know, this is becoming a good place, but you might have to go away to find that out, and then you can come back. But if you have the chance, travel.
Have you been back to Philly? Do you have plans on visiting again?
The last time I was back in Philly was many years ago, like 20 years ago or something. No, that's not even true. The last time I was in Philly was 7 years ago. No, I don't have really plans to go because I feel like I would just get upset too much, too often about too many things that are happening in the United States at the moment. It would not be good for my blood pressure. I mean, of course, there are places and people, like meeting you today makes me think like, maybe I could go for a visit. Yeah, so that's, I think I need to be a bit more open about that. But no, I have no plans to be in Philly. Sorry, Brenda.
Oh no, Brenda. That's unfortunate. I'm really interested in when the autobiography or the memoir is going to be written.
Yeah, that's a really good question.
An amazing memoir that would be. We didn't even touch on your experience with Dance Theater of Harlem and the sort of milieu of like New York City, Harlem, during the time that you were sort of coming into the space. If you could maybe talk a little bit about that for us.
Oh yeah, that was really interesting, being in New York from 1969 to 1971.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in a certain way, there was no better time to be there.
Mm-hmm.
It was very raw. Very gritty.
Yeah.
But that made for some also really fascinating artistic work,
Mm-hmm.
because there was no room for complacency.
Mm.
Artists were not complacent, and what you observed everything coming into conflict with everything, and all of these places where differences crossed, and no one was trying to hide.
Mm.
I mean, at a certain point, parts of the arts started to try to file off the edges.
Mm.
But right there at the end of the 60s, the beginning of the 70s, it was about the edges.
Wow.
And so, like, working with the Poor People's Theater, we did a play about Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement, and we did it outside. It was only performed outside on the street. We would go down to Wall Street, and we would just start somewhere, start doing this play. And these Wall Street bankers who only had an hour for lunch would stop and watch what was going on. And that was like, I loved that. That was like, if you can get them to stop and stand, then you're doing a good job.
Wow, and that was also quite subversive, right? To be in those particular places. So I'm thinking about your time in Europe, where you're talking about public performances of, like ballet, right? So bringing, sort of democratizing this sort of elite art. But here in New York, you're talking about what seems to me a more subversive act, which is to bring this Black theater into this sort of white financial space. What kind of work did you see that doing? So you talk about folks stopping. What sort of work did you see that doing?
these people all knew about the civil rights movement. They all knew about Martin Luther King. It wasn't that long ago, you know, at that time. But they felt like that was happening far away from me because I'm in New York. And the thing was, there were these bodies there, and you can push away something that's on a screen, you can push away something in print, you can theorize it, and you can make it become, you can take it to another level, so a meta level. But bodies, you cannot do that with bodies. You can't do that when somebody's sweat drops on you because they're so close to you when they're performing. So the work I saw that we were doing was making them remember that this is real.
Right. And it's very recent history and very close history as well. Like it's still ongoing. I mean, at the time that you're talking about performing, I would imagine we would still be in mourning, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so that's a very difficult thing to sort of push aside, right? Yeah. Wow. What an amazing moment.
I wonder if you can just juxtapose that moment to this moment and the Black Lives Matter movement. And how does your experience inform your perspective on that movement today?
Oh, I keep saying, didn't we already do this? It's like the next generation has to do certain things all over again. Because I thought we had done it, but evidently we had not. Evidently, the hearts have not given up their desire to be part of the oppressing class. Now, that's kind of hard to say, but I've been watching this stuff go on for so long, and now I just see that there's a desire to remain an oppressor. And there is, once again, I'm going to praise this new generation, the generation of like my children, because there are also even more that come after it. But the way this generation communicates, loves one another, takes risks, is the way we took risks, you know, but it's not less. Such courageous and beautiful and eloquent young people who know that they're right. So it's like, when I see the Black Lives Matter movement, of course, within the movement, there are like, sometimes this person's a bit uncomfortable, and sometimes that doesn't matter. That will always be, no matter what you're doing. But yeah, standing up and shining. It's great. And because of the civil rights movement, there's the space to do that again if it has to be done. But the people who did it the first time are not the people who are doing it now. You know, so what I really, really wish to do, and this is a part of one of the programs that I'm developing, is develop a program that creates a place for people who are activists to come and be taken care of. Yeah. You know, a place where you can exchange things that are not planning your strategies, but are like, I'm really tired and I'm really hurting, and to give some ways of caring for each other and caring for yourselves. And yeah, that's one of the programs I'm working on. Got some good ideas about that.
Yeah. And a very necessary program too, because you see a lot of burnout of
Yes.
young folks who are doing this work. So
Yes.
it's very necessary, I think, to have those spaces of healing, really,
Yeah.
for in order to be able to do that work again. And I think about what you said about the civil rights movement, right? And there were those spaces for activists to get food, to get fuel, to recharge, to rest, to find community, which is so important to you know,
Mhm.
be in this ongoing fight.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And also, like, I mean, I see my role in that as helping people to understand how to deal with their own emotion.
Yeah.
You know,
Mhm.
how to deal with. When I interviewed people here in Germany for this, I heard anger,
Mhm.
rage. I'm so enraged. I have so much rage, you know, helping people to understand, what can I do with that?
Right.
How can I prevent it from hurting me? Shame,
Mhm.
which is like that. There we could spend another evening talking about what shame is and what it does and how to deal with that. But that's what I want to do.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to interrupt here because we've come to the end of our time. But I know that we're going to be in conversation again. I trust that. And maybe if you don't come to Philly, maybe you'll come to New Jersey, or I'll just have to come over there. But in closing, I'd like to express my sincere appreciation to Elisabeth Clarke-Hasters and Sonya Donaldson, Dr. Emily Fraser-Rath, and importantly, to Davidson College for making this and so many important conversations possible. Today's recording will soon be uploaded on our YouTube channel at Black Germans. Our recent conference recordings are also in the process of being posted. So subscribe and turn on the notifications so that you will be advised as new recordings are added. Visit our website at bghra.org and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Eventbrite for details about upcoming events starting next week. We hope that you've enjoyed today's engaging conversation with Elisabeth Clarke-Hasters and Dr. Sonya Donaldson as much as we have. And until next time, we thank you again for your time and attention.